Okay, so this is going to be a relatively brief video on a subject that probably requires a long video. Um, but it's partly for space reasons and partly because it's late. I'm not going to make it too long. Um, a court in New York City has found the notorious Mexican drug lord El Chapo Guzman guilty on 10 charges, and imagine he's going to serve a lengthy prison sentence. I haven't followed the case very closely, but I've just seen snippets of it. Um, there's a number of observations I want to make regarding the Mexico drug war, regarding general issues around this. Incidentally, there's a new film coming out uh, by the name of Miss Baya. Miss Baya. Had to think for a second there. And it's a remake of an earlier Mexican film, which is about a young woman, a beauty queen in Baja, California, who gets caught up in operations of the drug cartels and she's charged. It looks like an interesting film. There's been a number of films made around the subject of the Mexico drug war. This has been a very, I mean, make no mistake about it, this is a war. It's not just a metaphorical war, it is a war in the same sense as the wars in Syria, South Sudan, Afghanistan. It's a war. And it's a war that has cost over 100,000 lives since it began in December 2006. Um, Wherever there are drug wars, they tend to be very bloody. I mean, the Philippines, over the past 3 or 4 years since President Duterte came to power, it's estimated that anywhere from 6 to 10,000 people have been killed in that drug war. So it can be argued that the whole concept of a war on drugs, and I've seen this argument many times, is counterproductive and it causes a lot more harm than good. And certainly the evidence that we have would seem to indicate that. But then they just go on record as saying that I hate the sort of recreational drugs, the sort of hard drugs that cause nothing but misery. You know, this is a complex subject and there's no easy answer to it. But I will say this, anyone that thinks that there should be a situation where heroin and cocaine and crystal meth are sold over the counter, I think that's utterly insane. I think there is an argument to be made for legalizing less dangerous drugs like marijuana, and certainly there's been many jurisdictions that have done that. I think there is an argument to that effect, although the counter argument would be, well, we currently have campaigns to, reduce the amount of problems brought about by alcohol and tobacco, which cost literally hundreds of thousands of lives every year. Here in the UK, they cost the NHS a huge amount of problems. I mean, you just have to look at any British town or city centre at night time to see the problems brought about by alcohol abuse. And over 100,000 people die in this country from tobacco related problems. So, my take is if we legalize any drugs, then all drugs cause health problems. There's no question about that. So, ostensibly, there would be a situation at some point where there will be if we, let's say we legalize marijuana, at some point there will be campaigns to reduce the consumption of marijuana, even though it's legal, as there currently is, anti-tobacco campaigns. So it, from that point of view, it could arguably end up costing a lot of money that way as well. So I think those who say, "Oh, the war on drugs is a failure. Let's just legalize all drugs," I think they're being incredibly short-sighted. I think you can argue that the war on drugs is a failure, but that doesn't mean that legalizing drugs is the answer. And I'm going to say something that I think is very obvious, but for some reason it's controversial, and I don't know why it should be, because to me it's very obvious. And it's this: I believe that drug users have a responsibility. Now, I'm sympathetic. I'm not heartless in terms of people maybe have difficulties in life. They become addicted to drugs for a variety of reasons, and it is a disease. It's something that is An addiction is an addiction. And people are addicted to overeating, they're addicted to alcohol, they're addicted to tobacco. Addictions are, it's basically a disease. But I do think if you make the choice to take an illegal substance, you can't blame that on everyone else but yourself. I'm sympathetic to an extent. I'm sympathetic, for example, maybe people are dealing with grief. Maybe they've been spiked. I'm very sympathetic in those cases where they've been spiked and, they form an addiction for reasons like that. But I will say this: every time someone buys heroin or cocaine in Los Angeles or Toronto or London, um, or Dallas, they are fueling these cartels. And these cartels are evil, evil people. As far as I'm concerned, they're just as sadistic, just as violent, and just as despicable as ISIS. And I do find it very disturbing that the likes of El Chapo have this sort of cult following online, like there's some sort of heroes. Kind of reminds me of Charles Manson. You just need to look at any interviews of Manson, the number of sick people out there who think he's some sort of folk hero. El Chapo is no Robin Hood type figure. I mean, some of the charges against him are that he personally has raped women. Even if you allow for the fact that some of this is exaggerated, and I don't believe it is, but even if you allow for that, this guy is no saint. He's an evil thug, as far as I'm concerned. And, anyone that sympathizes with these people are all they're doing is enabling. And you can say, oh well, it's being anti-CIA or anti-America, whatever, if that's your worldview. But bear in mind, who's suffering from these cartels? It's not the CIA. It's innocent Mexican civilians. The people I respect are small town mayors in rural Mexico who have the courage to stand up to these thugs. The people I respect are brave reporters who are risking their lives to expose these scumbags. They're evil people. And if you think, oh, it's just drug lords versus drug lords, cartels versus cartels, you're ignoring the fact they don't think twice about hurting women and children or innocent men. You know, um, they don't think twice about civilians getting caught in the crossfire, like those young students who were murdered in, I think it was Chiapas State 5 years ago. Um, so yes, there are legitimate arguments against the concept of a drug war, and I think Mexico is a very, very corrupt country. Without question, there are police who have taken money from cartels, and I would also say it's fair to say that various American administrations also have a lot to answer for. The CIA has a very, very murky history. I'm not naive about that. But let's just not hold up these cartels as being some sort of Robin Hood type figures. I mean, that's what I find very despicable. They may well put on a big facade. Uh, you know, um, I've heard, for example, of cartels building schools and hospitals, but do you really think that they're using that drug money for wholly benevolent purposes? No, they're ruthless criminals. I mean, the Cray twins in London in the 1960s, and I'm not saying it's comparable because it's organized crime, but it's yeah, they done charity work. Does that mean they weren't above, sadistic violence? Of course not. Just because criminals engage in charity work or give this impression, it's a facade. People need to understand this. And it's true that, Chapo going to prison isn't, it isn't going to end the drug war. There's going to be someone replacing him, just like the jihadists. I get that, and I get that that isn't going to end the drug war. But I think that there's a lot of factors that can end this, and I think, frankly, these wealthy users of it's not just about like street users. It's about wealthy, frankly, millionaires, snorting cocaine and abusing Class A drugs. I think they've got a lot to answer for. And they're not necessarily doing it because it's peer pressure or because they're coping with life's difficulties. No, they're doing it because it gives them a high. And frankly, I'm tired of the argument that certain drug users have that's everyone else's fault except theirs. They blame society, they blame family problems. Start taking some responsibility. If you choose to take an illegal, dangerous substance, take some responsibility, because what that is doing is directly fueling these cartels. So, yeah, I do think users have some responsibility. And yes, they're victims to an extent. But I don't consider them victims in the same way as, like I say, an innocent civilian caught in crossfire of two cartels. So I think El Chapo Guzman should spend the rest of his miserable days behind bars. He is a thoroughly evil man, and I have no sympathy with him. But there will be others who replace him. That's obvious. But let's stop treating these people as heroes. They're anything but. And it's one area I disagree with Trump on a lot of things, but Trump is right to say that MS-13 and other gangs and Mexican cartels, they are animals. They're as bad as ISIS. The things they do, torturing people, really extreme sadistic violence, raping women, um, they're as bad as ISIS. And it's about time people saw that.